Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege for me to chair this session. We have two distinguished personalities to wrap things up. To what extent that have to be wrapped depends on each of them. First of all, allow me to introduce the panelists, and to be nice, we should give a privilege to our friend from abroad. This is on my left-hand side, Tan Sri Dato Seri Muhammad Johar Hassan. He needs no need of introduction. He has been introduced once already, I suppose, in that session. But he has been serving in Malaysia as chairman, executive officer and chairman of ASEAN, Malaysian ISIS. He has been working in the Ministry of Interior, Home Ministry, Department of Prime Minister, and he has been working as member of Laureate Advisor Board of International University and College, former chairman of Malaysian International University and College, He has been working with CSCAP. I knew him when we were together in this CSCAP a long time ago. He has been also representative and expert and eminent person on ARF of ASEAN. Suppose that should be enough. Now, on my right-hand side, Professor Dr. Surachai Sirikrai. He has been educated from US and have been giving diplomas, extra study from Albrecht University, Christian Albrecht University, Royal Thai Navy Advanced Academy. He has been visiting research fellow of international relations at the Institute of Development Economics of Japan, visiting research fellow at Chuo University, Tokyo, executive member of Institute of Security and International Studies of Chulalongkorn University, and Dean of the Faculty of Political Science at Thammasat University. At present, he is an academic member of the King Prachatipak Institute and member of National Research Council. The last person on my far left-hand side, Dr. Prapat Thep Chatri, who organized this wonderful meeting. He is now an Director of ASEAN Studies Center at Thammasat University. He is also the President of the American Study Society of Association of Thailand. He has been working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs before and being a consul in China. He has been contributing to a lot of academic works, and he has been teaching very elaborately at both in many universities and institutes in Thailand, Bangkok, and other places. He also lectured at the Defense College and the Marine Institute of Higher Study of Marine of the Royal Thai Navy. He's also working together with Prapok Institute. There's a lot of articles and books he have been written. Now, for the crux of the problem that we're gonna discuss in this wrap-up session, allow me, Tansi, to have Professor Surachai have the priority to say a few words. You have about 20 minutes, I suppose.
Really? I think we have since our session is the last one, I think we have all the time that we have.
Not
Is that
all.
not correct? Okay. Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. Well, after sitting through this two-day session, I would like to make some comment. First of all, I fully agree with Dr. Surin, who made a joke yesterday in his keynote speech that ASEAN have always been an emerging organization because ASEAN cannot be ASEAN cannot be a key regional player because ASEAN had depend on outside power in both economic and politics. Dr. Surin have mentioned that ASEAN intra-regional trade is still very low, only 25% of the total amount of ASEAN trade. So ASEAN needs investment from outside power in order to create jobs and export products. So ASEAN had not been industrialized, or because we have not been able to industrialize. ASEAN lack of research and development. We have no innovation, no technology of its own. So they remain, an agricultural product exporter country and remain an example workshop for the industrial product for the developed country after 60 years since World War II. You see, so this is, I think it's very important. Except Singapore, the rest of ASEAN countries remain developing countries. So this question strikes me, and I have also think about this question, all along. Because, why ASEAN countries still cannot industrialize? I think this is a serious question. Because South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China were able, to industrialize, but why ASEAN countries fail to do so? So the question is, what's went wrong with ASEAN? What's went wrong with ASEAN? Especially, I always ask my Thai counterpart. Thailand is the only country that has not been colonized. And Thailand, begin to modernize its country, at the same period of as a Japanese Meiji Restoration period. But you can see the difference, how much Japan has been industrialized. And look at Thailand at the present day, what has been achieved in terms of economic development. I always ask my Thai colleagues, do you think, is there anything that the Japanese cannot produce? Is there anything that the Japanese cannot produce? And have you ever asked your question or asked yourself, as the Thai people, you think, what can Thailand produce? Any industrial products? Even though, Thailand have not been damaged or affected by World War II, Unlike South Korea and China, who have been heavily damaged by the war, but Thailand still failed to industrialize, despite having, begin to modernize, at the same period as Japan. So I think this is a big, to me, I think it's a key question that the Thai people, including ASEAN too, we should ask ourselves what's wrong with us. Why the Asian NIC can and ASEAN cannot? Are we going to, going to be a workshop for the developing country. Are we going to continue to rely on export agricultural product to the end of the world? I think this is, something wrong, Why Taiwan, South Korea, and China, have developed more far advanced than ASEAN and than Thailand. So to me, I always concerned with this ASEAN weakness. So as long as we are not be able to industrialize and we have to depend on the external power, how can ASEAN be a key player in this region? Since we have to depend, on the external power in both politics and economics. I think this is one of the key questions that we should pay serious attention.
It is
And
called ASEAN resilience.
resilience. I don't know. But to me, I think this is a very important issue to me. And also, the next question is that regarding the emerging global political and security landscape, I think that all the speakers in this conference, I agree that there is a rivalry or competition between China and the United States in East and Southeast Asia. China become the rising power and peer competitor of the declining American power. So the world is no longer a bipolar or unipolar under American hegemony, but a new multipolar or multiple polar system, which have emerged with the increasing role of the NGO, the non-state actor, religious group, and global citizens, have played increasing role in domestic and global politics. There are also increasing conflicting issues in the global arena and also in East Asia and Southeast Asia. However, speaker on this conference agreed that we should not demonize China by blaming everything on the rise of China. But a lot of Western writings have blamed tension in East Asia on the rise of China. So, as a sinologist, I would like to elaborate a little bit, about the role of China. First of all, a lot of people, have mentioned that or questioned that why China have to spend a lot of money, on the defense and expand and modernize their armed force. To my understanding, China have to do it, not because they want to be a hegemonic power in this region, but China, face a lot of domestic, issue, both domestic and external security issue. The first issue, the Chinese government have identified the four most important security issue for China that they describe them as core national interests. They are the following. First, the Taiwan issue. Second, the Tibetan issue. The third, the Xinjiang issue. And now the fourth, the South China Sea issue. These are most important, issue. They are core interest of China. Or every Chinese leader have to, protect and defend them, with their own capability. President Xi Jinping used to comment a year ago that how can China let the reunification of Taiwan with mainland China dragging on and on without ending? Because everyone knows that now Taiwan is a de facto, independent country. But legally, all the major power and most of the country in this world recognize that Taiwan is part of China. But the reason is that, in 1979, when United States and China have legally normalized their relations, the American Congress have passed the so-called Taiwan Acts, with three conditions, for the reunification of Taiwan to mainland China. The first one, the Taiwan Act imposed that the reunification between mainland and China must have done by peaceful means. The second condition is that American can continue to sell arms to Taiwan in order to defend itself. The third condition is that the United States continue to keep social and cultural relationship with the Taipei government. So this Taiwan Act is an outright intervention into Chinese domestic affairs that any Chinese leader can accept it. No Chinese leader can wait 100 more years for reunification of Taiwan with mainland. You see? So this is a big issue. And you can see that, and this is the issue that why China have to build up its armed force in order to deter the Taiwanese from declaring independence from China. This is the main purpose. Because when United States continue to sell arms to Taiwan, there is no way that the Taiwanese government will negotiate for reunification with mainland. Impossible. And this is a common knowledge, a common sense, you see. And regarding the Tibetan issue too, the American leader and Western leader continue to, receive the head of Tibetan religious leader Dalai Lama, in their government, even though the Chinese government always accuse Dalai Lama of being a separatist, you see, but the American government and Western country, seem not to care about the feeling of the Chinese government. You see, because they think that China can do anything, whatever, the other country, intervene into Chinese domestic affairs. So if you are Chinese leader, how do you going to solve this Chinese domestic issue? And the second reason, China is a large country that share border with 14 countries, you see. And the most important thing is that all the Chinese borders are drawn by the Western imperialists against the Chinese own wins after the so-called the Opium War. So I can tell you, no Chinese leader, except the present Chinese border. You see, especially the so-called the border with India in southern Tibet, including the South China Sea and the Diaoyu Island with Japan. Because most Chinese leaders consider this, territory, as Chinese territory that have been captured, by the foreign power when China was weak, against her will. So when China become a rising power, it naturally that they would like to take it back, or at least to negotiate, to take some part of it back. No Chinese leader will accept. Especially the Chinese leader in Beijing, they have proclaimed, since 1949 that they will not accept any unequal treaty that imposed on them by the colonialist power. You see? So you can see that China has so many domestic, problem issue to solve. And this is the main reason. These are main reasons that why they think that they need to, modernize the armed force in order to deter external power, especially United States and Western Europe, who like to intervene, whatever they want, whenever they want, into Chinese domestic affairs. Okay? And the next, reason that Chinese think that they have to, modernize their armed force is that the Chinese leader believe that America does not accept the restatement of China as a regional power. You see? And they believe that America tried to disarm China with a supersonic weapon or with advanced laser gun or by cyber warfare. So, and the United States also always spy on China, with all kinds of means, and try to overthrow the Chinese communist regime in Beijing through the so-called peaceful evolution by supporting the democratic force in China or by supporting human rights movement or democratic movement in China. You see? So the United States continue to try to contain China with military alliance with Chinese neighboring countries like Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, or India. So this is the reason that why China cannot let its arm down, And regarding about the so-called, so that the next reason that why China have to modernize, the other important reason that why China have to modernize its armed force is that the Chinese believe that China has the rights, has the same right equal to other big power to determine their own political system. China think that they are free, to develop their own political and economic system without conforming to the American political economic system. And the right of China, the success of China economic development have also proved that, that there are many alternative ways to develop your own economy. We don't have to follow American path, because in fact, a lot of developing countries who try to imitate American development policy have failed. So you can see that all the newly emerging economy in East Asia, including China and some other countries, they weren't able to modernize themselves through the other path, not following the Washington Consensus. So China believes that China have own right, to adopt, to use its own political and economic system. And in order to do so, they think that they need to have some power to bargain with the West. Otherwise, the West always, try to intervene and demonize China. So this is another important question. And lastly, the invasion of Iraq in the year 2003 and the bombing of Libya, to overthrow Gaddafi. This is another strong evidence that, the American government will destroy or punish any government that did not obey American order. So it is necessary. That's why China, at a rising power, have to, develop certain armed force to protect itself, in order to be able to be an independent, great power, in order to be able to have their own freedom in choosing their own political and economic system, without bothering with of the external power. And also, regarding the South China Sea, this is a very complicated issue, as we know that, and it concerns with many member ASEAN states who have overlapping claim, over the territory in South China Sea, you see. And this issue also divide the ASEAN member into 2 or 3 groups. Some have been accused as a pro-Chinese, some have been accused as pro-American, and some are neutral regarding the South China Sea issue. So I think this is another issue that ASEAN must play a strong role in solving this issue. Because in the past, ASEAN have played a very, very important role in solving conflict in this region. For example, ASEAN, play a leading role in solving the Cambodian crisis, when Vietnamese invade Cambodia, at the end of 1978, and occupied Cambodia for over a decade. The ASEAN are the one, especially the Thai government play a leading role, in order to press the Vietnamese force out of Cambodia. And we have succeeded. Without the assistance of American power, which claim to be our close ally, but they do nothing, to help us. Okay? And ASEAN also played a leading role in solving the Cambodian crisis in 1999, when there was a conflict, a power struggle between Prince Ronalit and Prime Minister Hun Sen. You see? So the ASEAN had established the Troika, composed of 3 ASEAN chairmen, to solve the conflict. And the conflict has been successfully solved by ASEAN mechanism. So these are, some examples that I still very optimistic and believe that ASEAN should continue to play a leading role, in solving this regional conflict. Otherwise, if we fail to do it, you will leave more room for the external power to intervene in this, into this region affair. You see? So I believe that, ASEAN should encourage both Vietnam and Philippines to negotiate, in order to solve the South China Sea peacefully with China. Because I don't believe that China, want to be enemy with any member of ASEAN country. I don't think that China want to be enemy with the United States, because the speaker, in this conference have common agreement that China still need, ASEAN and need the world, and the world also need China. So in my opinion, that China try to avoid all the conflict and especially war. So I think that if ASEAN should play a strong role in solving this conflict, and I hope that especially, the Chinese leader have offered to the ASEAN claimants, that they are willing to share the sovereignty issue and jointly, develop the South China Sea, with all the claimant states. So I think this is this alternative is the most popular alternative that have been adopted by all the countries all over the world that facing this similar problem. So the question is that, ASEAN should play a bigger role in solving these conflicts, And lastly, a lot of people think that ASEAN should remain, being a cohesive and improve its strength, especially, as an ASEAN community, by developing according more norms and principles and establishing more institutions in order to make ASEAN be able to cope with all the new changing regional and global environment, changing issue. So, yesterday, Dr. Surin also asked me, what are you? Are you an optimistic or pessimistic or cautiously optimistic? I told him that I'm totally an optimistic, that I would like to see ASEAN, grow stronger and stronger, because Thailand and Dr. Thanath Khoman was the one who organized and established ASEAN. And his main objective is to be able to be more independent from the external power. As you know, in the past, Thailand have strongly allied ourselves with United States. But we learned that, we cannot rely on the United States. Because Thailand is a small power, but while the United States is the global power, we cannot change American policy. But American can always change the Thai foreign policy. And we have suffered a lot, under the Thai-American military alliance, because you see that when United States changed its policy, from anti-communist China to Detong with Beijing in 1971, United States never tell us, even a single word, that, hey, fellow, I'm going to change policy. America never do that at all. So when they want to leave, when they want to go to Beijing, they just go. And the Thai people were shocked, because Americans have always, encouraged us to, demonize communist China. But American itself changed the policy without telling us that it's going to change policy. So when American, have their tongue with China and then leave Vietnam, what happened? All the Indo-Chinese states become Vietnam. And at the end of 1978, Vietnamese invade Cambodia. Again, United States never pay attention to ASEAN. United States never give any help to solve ASEAN financial crisis, either in 1997. They don't do any damn thing at all. They have already forget that we are their ally. They never give up any loan. They just force us to borrow money from IMF in order to make IMF force us to accept their condition, which is, it have done more damage to our economy. So these are the lessons that we at the time have learned by heart, that we should try to less dependent on the external power and try to try to strengthen our regional cooperation among the ASEAN members. I think that the most rational way to conduct our foreign policy. So this is the reason that why Dr. Thanat initiated ASEAN, in 1965. And he spent 2 years, to sell his idea among the Southeast Asian nations that we should try to be independent, rather than dependent on the external power for our own security and economic development. And 47 years after the establishment, I think the ASEAN have achieved a lot. But at the present, we also, face a new crisis because United States, try to contain the rising China. So I think for the ASEAN, we have to think whether, what kind of policy that we should adopt for ASEAN. Are we going to join the American alliance against China? Or are we going to stay neutral? Or are we going to pro-China? To me, we should strengthen ourselves and uphold the so-called ASEAN centrality policy. I think this is the most rational way for us. We should build up, strengthen up, our 10 ASEAN countries, you see. So the time is up. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Surachai. He mentioned three main things. That is why up to now ASEAN still stay sort of emerging, never passed from this cocoon and to become the real animal or butterfly. And he describes to us the predicaments of China armament and to a great extent and explained in some details of why China need to militarize. And last part of his talk, he mentioned the role of ASEAN in solving problems within the regional problem. ASEAN has done that before, and becoming more institutionalized. ASEAN should maintain that image and capability. Now, Tansi, could you be kind to proceed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Vitia. I'd like to begin, as my colleagues from overseas did, by thanking Thammasat University, in particular Dr. Prapat, for giving me this opportunity to share my views with you, although this more I'm wrapping up more. I think through the 2 days that we have had, I think we have had very excellent presentations, and I think it has been quite comprehensive given the theme that was given. What I intend to do is more or less my understanding of some of the things that were said, including my own perspective of some of these things. I'm going to do this in 3 parts. First, some remarks about the global strategic environment, external strategic environment, both the global as well as regional. Second, where ASEAN is now, whether it's emerging or where it is along this process of development. And third, what ASEAN must do going forward. But before I go into these 3 parts, I just want to make a general statement, and that is that, in my view, development is a continuous process. All regional institutions, organizations continue to develop as they go on. Now, whether you are emerging, at what point you have already emerged, sometimes it's very subjective. For me, ASEAN has already emerged. And I will explain later why I say that. But I'm going to start from that premise. ASEAN has already emerged, but in order to remain relevant and useful, continue to be useful, it has to do much more. That doesn't mean, however, that it has not emerged. And in particular, it has to do much more in 3 domains. First, domestic, national, within each member country. ASEAN can only be as strong as the sum of its parts. If the parts or some of the parts are weak, then ASEAN will not be as strong as we would like it to be. Second is in the intra-ASEAN domain, among ASEAN countries themselves, and here I'm referring to the ASEAN community, ASEAN regionalism. And third, of course, in the external challenges, how ASEAN manages its external challenges. It is in these three domains that ASEAN has to work in order to remain relevant. To begin with, the external environment. I said I'll do it in three parts. First, the external environment. Here, my view is that the external environment is generally conducive. That the geopolitics, the geoeconomics is generally favorable to ASEAN. And I'm looking at the big picture. I think in terms of economics, it will be very difficult to find a better moment for ASEAN to prosper and thrive, because the center of economic power is moving to this region. This is the time when we take advantage, operationalize all these things that are happening, and gain the most from what is occurring at this moment in history, when economic power, geoeconomic power is shifting back to the Asian region, or shall we say to the Asia-Pacific region. ASEAN should take advantage of this and exploit it to the maximum. And China, of course, is the driver, is a great driver for the region, and we should synergize from this. Having said that, external environment is not all good for ASEAN, of course, and there are at least two challenges in terms of the external strategic environment that are not particularly good for ASEAN. And this is, first, revival of the rivalry between the major powers. This can impact negatively on ASEAN, its future prospects, and on the future prospects of the region. And second, of course, as far as ASEAN is directly concerned, the South China Sea, the problems in the South China Sea, which in the last 1-2 years have taken, the situation has taken for a worse. So these to me are the two negative things. Of course, I can talk about the Korean Peninsula, etc., but I'm coming close to ASEAN. But otherwise, our external strategic environment is very positive. The second aspect I wanted to talk about is where ASEAN is now, how it is faring. For me, as I said, it has already emerged. And here, I would like to say why it has already emerged, in what sense. Now, ASEAN, we all claim, we say it's 47 years old. I don't know where sometimes we say 60 years old. I don't know where we got that. But ASEAN is 47 years old. That is the general wisdom. But I think we must be more granular in our assessment of ASEAN. ASEAN 10 is only 15 years old. The ASEAN that we have now is only 15 years old. The 10th member joined in 1999. Before that, there was no ASEAN 10. Only half of ASEAN is 47 years old. The other half are somewhere in between 15 and 47 years old. And we must take this into consideration. You know, sometimes we get impatient because we think we have been around for 47 years, but only half of ASEAN has been around for 47 years. So I think we should take this into consideration. Now, considering that we are between 15 and 47 years old, considering that we are largely, almost all of us, with the exception of Singapore, are developing countries, and three of these developing countries are in the bottom 50 of the Global Human Development Index. The bottom 50. considering that 9 of us are developing countries, 3 of us in the bottom 50 Human Development Index ranking, ASEAN as an organization has come a long way. It has no business being where it is now. And yet, it is driving all the regional processes in the Asia-Pacific, or nearly all, except for APEC and this. How is ASEAN able to do that? This collection of, developing countries and all that, yeah? So that is why I say, despite all these things, ASEAN has emerged. But that does not mean that we have little to do, that we are already strong, etc. We have a long way to go, and I will come to that very soon. Behind ASEAN. So I think we should put ASEAN in perspective. My whole intention here is to put ASEAN in perspective, where we are. We have achieved quite a bit, but there is plenty more to do. That's my essential point. Second, what ASEAN has done, besides anchoring these economic and security cooperation processes in the region, despite being what it is, I think ASEAN has brought much peace in Southeast Asia. And we must recall that just 30 years ago, this region was a region of great instability, violence, and war. Now, ASEAN was not responsible for this, all responsible for this change, but it had a large part to do with this. Pax ASEAN is something that is quite tangible and evident, and we should not downplay this thing. Third, what ASEAN has helped facilitate is economic development. Now, some of our speakers have already, Ponch and the rest, how far we have come in the last few decades. It's not all due to ASEAN, of course, but ASEAN has facilitated this by making the regional environment, Southeast Asia environment, and contributing to the larger Asia-Pacific environment conducive to this kind of this. Finally, I want to do this quickly. ASEAN has also, in terms of bequeathing or strengthening or giving, establishing norms and principles of cooperation in Southeast Asia and beyond through the TAC, through what it stands for, inclusiveness, cooperative security, comprehensive security, pragmatism, ideologically progressive. What I mean by that is we all want ASEAN to be political and security pillars. We want ASEAN to be more democratic, etc. But at the same time, very pragmatic, not intolerant of other systems of government or systems of government which are not fully democratic yet. And then, of course, we stress very much principles of non-aggression, etc. So it's these kinds of norms and principles that we stand for and we propagate in this region through the ARF tag, etc. So for this reason, I think ASEAN is already here, ASEAN is strong, it is doing some very, very good, tangible things for itself and for the broader region. But going forward, ASEAN has much more to do. And here, I would say that it has to become more robust, more empowered, more adept at managing the great challenges in the 3 domains that I mentioned earlier. This is domestic, national, within Southeast Asia, within ASEAN, and in the broader region. And within countries, we particularly need, and as I said, ASEAN can only be as strong as the sum of its parts. Each country has to do more in the national domain. It has to be more better governance politically, economically. It has to be more socially cohesive. And in terms of political governance, it includes, of course, our political administrative system, etc. And in terms of economics, we all need to become more vibrant, more competitive, and champion economic development with a human face. Some of my friends have already mentioned many of these things that we need to do, but I just want to highlight a few things. First, equitable growth. Not just growth, but equitable growth. And jobs, employment, because work, income gives you dignity, human dignity. Poverty eradication, we have mentioned 95 million hardcore poverty in the region. 95 million is a big number. For a region of 600 million people, 95 million is almost 1/6. Sometimes when we talk about, we become very impatient about ASEAN, we are thinking about we forget that we have so many internal problems which we have to manage. Environment, human rights, corruption, I'm jumbling all together, R&D, it was stressed, R&D, we are so poor, innovation, technological capability, etc. But in the essence of all these things is human development. Better governance, and good governance in a very comprehensive sense, political, economic, social, etc. Now, until we do all this, it will be very difficult for ASEAN to gain even more credibility. We are a bunch of developing countries, some very poor, and some of us democratic, not democratic, human rights friendly, not human rights friendly, etc. So we have to achieve these things in order to be better viewed, and when perceptions of ASEAN improve, then ASEAN can become more effective. Now, second thing is ASEAN itself, the intra-ASEAN thing. And here I think it's best encapsulated by saying that we have to realize the ASEAN vision and the ASEAN community. It's not going to happen in 2015. Some parts, yes, we put our benchmarks very low in the AEC, etc., and political security, so long as we meet so many times, we have met our goals. Substance-wise, there's much more to do, but we don't have to be very, deprecating about all this. It's not very easy, because we come from, highly diverse situations in each country, and it's very difficult. We have to work on all three pillars. We have to get serious, not just be rhetoric. We have to be driven by rules, not just by, what we say, norms, etc. So we have to become more cohesive, more institutionalized. My friends have already mentioned that, and become more relevant to stakeholders beyond governments. Private sector, very important. Private sector, SMEs, etc. And of course, people, the people themselves, etc. And I don't want to do that. I don't have much time. My time is coming up. But we have to get serious. And for ASEAN, some of my friends have already commented on this, leadership deficit. Presently, there appears to be a leadership deficit. And this is very difficult to this, but we should all pool our capabilities together in order. Of course, there's strengthening of the institutionalization of ASEAN. We have to work very hard on that. Now, manage challenges. We have to manage challenges beyond ASEAN because we have given that responsibility to ourselves. Unlike some of the other SARC, this is why I say ASEAN, we should not keep saying this. That we keep emerging, etc., in a rather negative way, but in a positive way. Yes, we are emerging, but we continue to emerge. SARC, for instance, does not give itself any responsibility to do some things beyond the SARC region, but ASEAN does. We talk about ARF, Asia Pacific, etc. And we have taken the responsibility, and some of the specific things we have to do, of course, South China Sea. We have to de-stress the situation in the South China Sea. And there are two things in particular we have to do. One, work very hard on the COC, of course, and then abide by it, not just China abiding by it, all the rest of us also abide by it. Sometimes we ourselves don't, even on the DOC. So we have to work very hard on the COC, and we have to work with China on this. And second, I think we have to do something about this nine-dash line. This is causing a lot of problems. I think we have to emphasize international law, abide by international law, and try, constructively try to persuade upon China to submit to international law, including the 9-dash. What does the 9-dash line mean? Does it mean only the features you claim and the territorial sea and EEZ beyond those features? Is it the whole area within the 9 dash line, etc.? This has to be clarified. Otherwise, we are going to continue to have problems. The second, one is South China Sea, external problems. Second is managing the serious and destabilizing effects of major power rivalry, which has intensified. And here I think one of the first things we have to do is to have a very sound analysis of the strategic situation in the region. And here we will see, for instance, that I don't have much time, you know, that it is a multipolar world, but the number one power, never forget it, is still the United States of America. And it is going to be the most comprehensive power in the region for a long, long time. Economic power, etc., this, that, but comprehensive power, soft power, plus hard power, plus innovation, appeal, technological prowess, competitiveness with, outside human talent coming in, it's still the United States is going to be number one. So when we raise this China threat specter, we have to put that in this. Second, militarily. Now, we must understand that militarily, we always go for increase in expenditure, increase, and China increasing. No, we must again put things in perspective. The number one military power is the United States. And that is multiplied, magnified by its alliances. China is alone. China's increase now, it's 188 billion it's spending on military. What is the US spending? 700 billion. What China spent in the last 10 years, 2000 to 2010, in 10 years, America spent in 1. So I think we must put all these things in perspective. We must watch China, no doubt. It's too big. It's getting more. We must watch. Sometimes it gets a bit assertive, and I think it's learning its lesson. It has to this. But we must also watch Japan. I have no time to elaborate. And for ASEAN, we must stick to what we have, which is friends to all. Make none our enemy as far as possible. Zopfan, rekindle it. Make it 21st century compliant and in the present situation. We have to be more proactive on regional security issues, and we have to move beyond ARF. We have to promote our idea of security, cooperative security, comprehensive security, common security, inclusive security. In this regard, we should try as far as possible to moderate this tendency towards strengthening alliances is going on even today in Australia, strengthening alliances and creating new ones because they are unnecessary. America is already there, its alliances are already very strong. Incidentally, Japan, not China, is the number one military power in Asia, naval as well as air. Now I have to end, I want to end here. I don't want to go on and on. We have to do, of course, many things, more proactive in the economic sphere, of course. It is even more multi-layered than in the security sphere with all these alphabet soups, etc. We have to, I better stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Choha. You mentioned the situation of external environment which is favorable to ASEAN now, and ASEAN must maximize it. Only to challenge posing for ASEAN is big power, major power rivalry, and the South China Sea. He asked where ASEAN is now after 15 years as a group, the whole group, 10 countries, or 47 years altogether. And there are some discrepancies among member states of ASEAN as far as development is concerned, yet ASEAN has been pulling along quite well. What he emphasized is peace in Southeast Asia, economic development, establishing norms, and become pragmatic in terms of principles. We are going forward regionally, globally. We are having growth, but growth must be equitable. We must tackle poverty. We must talk about human rights, and we must talk about human development, even governance. And lastly, he mentioned the challenge, and he dwelled on South China Sea, whether it can turn from DOC to COC, and then the major power rivalry, particularly the role of US and Japan. At the same time, ASEAN must stick together and seek its own security moderation. Now, the last person is Professor Papat. Could you please proceed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Since I'm the last to speak, so what I would like to say has already been said. So it's difficult for me as the last person to speak. But anyway, I try to add something into the conference. And my purpose, my presentation here would be to meet the purpose of this conference, is that to analyze a global political security and economic landscape and regional one and affecting ASEAN, and also what should be ASEAN strategies to promote its role as a global and regional player. So it seemed to me that I agree with a lot of what Joha has already mentioned. So maybe, and my analysis, my outline seemed to be very close to my colleague Joha has already analyzed. But anyway, I will try to add something into it. First, I would like to answer the first question. What is the global and regional trend affecting ASEAN? So from what I have been listening for the today's session, from yesterday and also today, and I also would like to add something in it, is that the first thing is about the global architecture. Global architecture can be divided to global security architecture and global economic architecture. I think that as far as the global political system is concerned, there are two important things, two important trends that will have a lot of effects on ASEAN. The first one is the trends, the move from a unipolar world to a multipolar one, or from the unipolar world to a multilateral one. So that is the first important trend. But can we say that right now the world is a unipolar world or a multipolar one or a multilateral one? I don't think we can say that. My analysis is that we are living in a world, it's a hybrid world. It's a mix of unipolar, multipolar, and multilateral. Okay, so that was the first global trend. The second one, as some of us already mentioned a lot during the past 2 days, that is the big power conflicts. Big power conflicts. And this will have a lot of effects on ASEAN, particularly if you focusing narrow down to big power conflict within the region, let's say between the US and China. The big power rivalry is dividing ASEAN right now. You look at South China Sea, you look what happened 2 years ago when ASEAN foreign ministers meeting could not come up with a joint communique. You look at the TPP, 4 member ASEAN countries join it and another 6 do not. So a lot of things that big powers trying to do to compete is dividing ASEAN. Okay, so this is the global political architecture. How about the global economic architecture? I think there are 3 important trends here. The first one is, I think the world is moving, the global economic system is moving from a unipolar world 50, 60 years ago when the US was a world economic hegemon. But right now, as you can see, the deadlock in the WTO, you can see that the world right now is already been in a multipolar one with a lot of actors involved. And the second trend concerning the global economic system is the decline, the ineffective of the global economic institutions. Talk about WTO, Doha Round, you talk about IMF, talk about World Bank, you talk about G7, G20, they are going nowhere. So we have a problem concerning a global institutional deficit at the global level. And then we also have, as we know, the serious conflict between the North and the South. The serious conflict between the rich and the poor. This is the most important factor why Doha Round is going nowhere. And then we also have, okay, so these are the important things concerning about a global architecture affecting ASEAN. How about the regional architecture affecting ASEAN? I think that if we analyze regional architecture, we also have to be aware of 3 rises. 3 rises. Number 1 is the rise of Asia. The second one is the rise of China. And the third one is the rise of ASEAN. I think these are 3 important rises. And as Joha, my colleague, had already mentioned, that the rise of Asia, the shift of economic dynamism from the west to the east, this is conducive to ASEAN. And ASEAN, and I agree with him that we should take advantage of this global shift, from the west to the east. And another thing that I would like to analyze is the concerning about the regional architecture. Okay, and here I would like to get into my PowerPoint. I think one of the most important questions for ASEAN or for the region is that which actor or what organization should be the core of the regional architecture. There are several competing models to be the core of the regional architecture. Okay. The first one, I would call it a unipolar system. in which the US would be the core of the regional architecture. And if you follow the US strategy toward the region, you can see that maybe this will sum up American strategy toward the region. That is, the US will still be the core of the regional architecture, in which the US would be the hub and the allies and partners would be the spokes. And then the US would come up with several multilateral forums. The most important one would be the TPP, and of course, revival of APEC and joining the EAS. So this would be the number one model for the regional architecture. The second one is the potential emergence of the multipolar system in Asia. When we talk about this, of course, we will talk about the role of China, the role of Japan, the role of India, and maybe the role of Russia. Okay, this would be the second model, competing model to be the core of the regional architecture. Will the system or the region will be defined by the multipolar one, or it will be like some would like to already been proposed, that is the idea of the concert of Asia, in which we will have the G8 of Asia that would include Australia, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and the US. So this would be the concert of Asia, comparable to concert of Europe in the 19th century. This would be the third model for the regional architecture in Asia. And the fourth one would be the other multilateral forums, APEC and TPP. Okay, so these four models will put ASEAN and also will be a constraint for ASEAN. So let's move to the fifth one. Okay, the one that I would like to stress is the ASEAN will be the core of the regional architecture. And of course, as some of us has already mentioned, ASEAN has a lot of potential to be the core of the regional architecture. If you realize, if you be aware of, GDP of 10 ASEAN countries combined is $2 trillion. That would make ASEAN number 9 in the world in terms of the size of the economy. And the ADB already come up with a report that by the year 2030, ASEAN GDP will increase to around $6 or $7 trillion. That will make, within the next 10, 20 years, that will make ASEAN to be maybe number 5 in the world in terms of the size of its economy. And then, if you look around in the region, you can see that ASEAN is the most important regional institution in the region. And as my colleague Joha already mentioned, you look around the world, you can see that ASEAN is only second to the European Union in terms of the regional grouping. So we have a lot of potential, ASEAN as a group, and we has a potential to be the core of the regional architecture. But the important question for this is that how can ASEAN would become the core of the regional architecture. How can ASEAN could play a regional role, increase its regional role? So I think that if you look at this concentric cycle of ASEAN as the core of the regional architecture, you can see that ASEAN will be in the most ring. And the second ring would be ASEAN plus one. So in order to be the core of the regional architecture, ASEAN should be able to manage all these rings. ASEAN itself, ASEAN 10, that would be the core. Maybe I would say that is the most important thing we have to do. Agree with Joha that we have a lot of things to do. But concerning about ASEAN plus one, I think that to be the core of the regional architecture, we have to manage our dialogue partners well. In this sense, ASEAN China, ASEAN US, ASEAN India, ASEAN Japan. Maybe the grand strategy would be that we should strike for some kind of a balanced engagement, equilibrium. And as Joha said that, and I agree that we must be able to manage a big power rivalry, particularly between the US and China, and also between Japan and China, and maybe India and China. So we have a lot of things to do concerning about ASEAN plus one. How about ASEAN plus three? ASEAN plus three, as you know, has been established since 1997. ASEAN 10 plus China, Japan, and Korea. In 1999, we came up with a joint declaration, and in 2002, we come up with the report, the vision that we will move ASEAN plus three and evolve it into the East Asia Community, or the EAC. But then some countries that are not members of the ASEAN plus three feel uncomfortable, and they are afraid of being excluded from the emerging regional architecture. So ASEAN plus three has been perceived as an exclusive East Asian club that will exclude other countries. So ASEAN plus three in recent years, that's why it has a problem. It has been slowing down, the evolution of ASEAN plus three. But anyway, I still think that we should keep ASEAN plus three alive, and maybe tone down its vision to be some kind of a loose, gradual East Asia community as a long-term goal. That is why right now the emphasis is on the East Asia Summit, the EAS, or the ASEAN plus 8, that would include India, Australia, New Zealand, the US, and Russia as well. In this case, East Asia Summit could be an inclusive club that would include everyone. And in between, we have the ASEP. We have the ASEAN plus 6 FTA, and I would emphasize that ASEAN should play an important role to pushing for the conclusion of the ASEP negotiation, the ASEP. Okay, so these are the external things that ASEAN has to do: ASEAN plus 1, plus 3, plus 6, and plus 8. But then it will, as I will try to emphasize that maybe the most important thing for ASEAN to do to be the core of the regional architecture is to strengthen ASEAN itself among ASEAN 10. So what should we do? My colleague Joha already mentioned about the ASEAN Community Project. We must succeed in establishing the ASEAN community. And I think that we have a lot of challenges. The APSC, still a long way to go before we can have effective conflict resolution mechanism. And I think that the big problem for ASEAN countries, we have to accept that is that we still do not trust each other. And this has become a big problem for ASEAN countries to join together as a real community. So trust building is the very important thing, trust building among ASEAN countries. We must resolve political conflicts and border disputes among ourselves. And we also must strengthen defense and military cooperation, should come up with mechanisms to deal with transnational issues and other non-traditional security issues. And as we already mentioned, we cannot stop at 2015. We have to think beyond 2015. So what would be the AEC beyond 2015? As you know, AEC is not a single market because we don't have 4 freedoms. So AEC is not a single market, it's not a common market. So maybe beyond 2015, to strengthen ASEAN as a group, as an economic grouping, can we move forward for a comprehensive ASEAN common market beyond 2015? And can we look beyond that? Something like the economic union. And then we also have to resolve the big problem within ASEAN, that is the rich-poor gap between the rich countries in ASEAN and the poor members. And maybe one of the most important things that I would see is that because we still do not trust each other, that's why we still see each other as economic competitor rather than economic partners. That's why it's very difficult for us to come up with the common positions on many things. So maybe we must try to find a way to change our perceptions towards each other, to see other member ASEAN countries as our partners, not our competitors. Okay, and my time is up, so I would like to conclude that we also have to have not only a deeper integration, but also wider integration. East Asia community should be the key to the wider integration of ASEAN. 10 countries maybe is too small. European Union, it has 28 member countries. And the EU is keep on widening, adding more and more members. But for ASEAN, we come to the dead end concerning about our members. So maybe we have to find a way to widen our integration. Okay. And my last PowerPoint is that in the end, maybe we have to build our common identity, ASEAN identity. Maybe we also have to bring the people participation in ASEAN. And lastly, common policy. We need a common policy, we need a common position. Okay, so these are the things that I would like to stress here, and my time is up, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Papat. He has elaborated on the so-called global or regional structure. He talked about the situation of whether we have a unipolar or multipolarity at the present, but he believed that it's a mixed type, not either one. He discussed big power rivalry or conflicts. He cited the position of US and China, problem of South China Sea. He talked about economy, world economy, the differences between the North and South, and conflict among two groups. He talked about regional architecture, which he mentioned the rise of Asia, the rise of China, the rise of ASEAN, and what should be the core of these rises. Should it be US, or should it be multipolar system, or should it be concert of Asia type, or should it be multilateral kind, or whether ASEAN should be the core, and if ASEAN chose to be the core, what could be done to ASEAN to strengthen it to serve that purpose? Now, do we allow interjection from the floor? Now, any of you feel urged to say something, please keep it a bit short. Professor Anucha, please.
I just want to make a short statement. As sometime architectural policy, I would ask myself, why do we want to do certain things? And for me, we have ASEAN in order to improve the quality of life of the people in ASEAN. And hopefully, perhaps it will overflow to affect the quality of life of humanity in a global sense. So to me, unipolar, bipolar doesn't make much importance to me. It depends upon my concern be how do we enrich the life of people in ASEAN. And to do that, we need to do many things, as Dr. Rapat said so at the last of his statement. And as we gain in terms of quality of life, richness, improvement, strength, and so on, perhaps we can gain importance in terms of the global aspect. But I'm a bit confused about the importance of aiming to be an important player in the global arena. For me, is not the point. My point as policy advisor to government is to enrich the quality of life of the people of Thailand, the people of ASEAN, and hopefully the people in the global aspect. So this kind of discussion, I think, is secondary to the objective in my mind. But anyhow, as become important in terms of strength and economics and so on, we gain importance, and that's how the superpower gain importance, acceptance in the world. Okay, that is just my observation.
Thank you. Now, who will really be the last? No. The last person to speak today is Professor Papat himself. So he will be delivering his concluding remarks.
As we already have passed 4 p.m. already, so my conclusion would be very brief. And once again, I would like to say that, on behalf of the Center for ASEAN Studies, Thammasat University, I would like to express our deep appreciation to all, for the panelists, for the chairpersons, and particularly, and most important, for the participants here to spare your time with us. And I think that we have a very fruitful deliberations yesterday and today. We have discussed a lot of things, and I think that the conference did provide great opportunities to explore a lot of things, and we also plan, as I mentioned during my welcoming speech yesterday, that we plan to have the annual, to have this as an annual event. And over the long term, this conference maybe will evolve into some kind of a think tank platform for ASEAN scholars and stakeholders, and can be another important track through a process for ASEAN and beyond. So I will hope to see all of you next year when we have the second conference next year. Thank you very much.